Good morning. I'm Daryl Brugink, Executive Editor with No-Till Farmer, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's webinar where we're going to learn a bit about managing annual ryegrass. First and foremost, one of the things we want to talk about today is how best to control it in the springtime here ahead of planting. But our guest speaker today is going to share numerous other tips regarding the use of annual ryegrass as a cover crop. Today's No-Till Farmer webinar is sponsored by KB Seed Solutions, and they are the producers of KB Supreme and KB Royal Annual Ryegrass Seed, and we want to thank them for making today's webinar possible. And we also want to thank our presenter, Cameron Mills, a no-tiller from Walton, Indiana, for sharing what he's learned from years of experience using annual ryegrass as a cover crop. So with that said, I want to thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn over the controls to Cameron Mills. Good morning to you, Cameron. How are things in north central Indiana today? I know you've been a little bit wet lately.
Yeah, good morning, Daryl. We're doing fine. The sun's shining for a change, and it's kind of nice instead of raining.
That's great.
All right. Well, I think we're ready to get started. And again, my name's Cameron Mills, and we are located around the Walton, Indiana area. And so, just a few little things to start off with. A lot of my thoughts today are experiences we've experienced on our farm and research we've done on our location, and so that's based a lot of my opinion. So you may not see the same experiences or have the same experiences. So I just want to clarify some of that right out of the gate. The first picture on your screen is a picture of our grain setup on our farm, and we took that out of the helicopter last fall at about 500 feet or so. But the most important and interesting thing you can see at a distance, you can see a lot of green fields, and those are all of ours that we aerially applied annual ryegrass on, and either by itself or in a mixture. And one of the interesting things you can see is a lot of the browner fields. Those are all actually stalk fields that actually have annual ryegrass flown on as well. So they're a little hard to see in this picture. But what I wanted to kind of point out is you can see not everything is perfectly even in some of these bean stubble fields, but you cannot, we've not been able to determine any plain patterns. What we can see is just simply the stage of the beans that we flew on. Some obviously had greener leaves and some didn't, so that does pose a little bit of an obstacle getting a perfect stand. But according to this picture and those spots that look a little more barren, there actually is annual ryegrass down there. It's just shorter. So in my opinion, I consider this a success. We had a really good stand when it all got shook out last fall. So obviously this webinar is about termination and or you're controlling ryegrass. So I'm just going to give you a little background information. We farm about 3,500 acres, corn, soybean rotation mainly. Been no-tilling since 2000 and cover cropping since 2006. And our goal these days is to cover every acre possible with cover crops that we can. We try to leave no acre uncovered. Our soil types are fairly flat. We do have some poorly drained soils with the tile, and we do have a little gentle rolling slope with pretty low organic matters. So I guess to kind of kick things off, I believe in controlling ryegrass is management. And the first thing that everybody needs to do is determine your own management abilities, your skill level. Is it right for you to start out with 20 acres of it? Is it right for you to start out with 500? Annual ryegrass normally overwinters very well and requires a little higher level of management. And a lot of it is mindset. Once you feel that, it's just like everything. If you think you can do it, you're going to get it done. And then also, making sure that your cover crop program matches your equipment and spray program, or you're willing to change those to match your cover crop program. Having this all thought through ahead of ever even planting it is always a good idea to be successful. We'll jump right in determination of annual ryegrass, and again, this is how we deal with terminating it. And so we always start out with 1 quart of Roundup. We use Power Max is what we use. I know I've got listed 1 to 2. The 1 to 2 is you could go out with 2, but and hit it with 2 if you wanted to. But the thing we've noticed that if you can't control it 1 quart of Roundup, you're not going to control it with 2 quarts of Roundup. So usually that falls back to timing. So 1 quart of Roundup, we use 1 quart of 2,4-D. Some people don't think that might be a little on the high side, but what we found out is we do have volunteer winter annuals that if with aerial application, not everything's perfect. So we're going to get those mare's tail and some other things popping late in the spring, and we want to nuke them down as best we can. We also use 4 pounds of citric acid per 100 gallons of water. Obviously, there are other for our type of citric acid that we're using, 4 pounds is recommended. There are other products out there to use, but we like to use the citric acid to lower the pH of the water. We feel we get a little better results with the glyphosate. And then we're using dry AMS at the labeled rate. It's real important to make sure that, and I'll pause right here and mention this, is to get the mixing order on all of these ingredients right. I mean, we start out putting the dry AMS in first, and we agitate it pretty well with a full tank of water, and then we put in the citric acid and then the rest of the ingredients, the Roundup and the 2,4-D. And I think that's real important. So if you don't get it in the right order, you can tie up some things, and it just doesn't work as well. We also are only using 10 to 12 gallons of water as carrier. I know guys can get away with doing 15, but we find that we like those droplets a little more concentrated, and we get pretty good coverage at 10 to 12, depending on the situation. Want to make sure we stress no atrazine 28 in the mix. It just it really ends up burning the leaf tissue too much before we get the glyphosate absorbed, and it can create a lot of problems sometimes. The other thing I put on here is don't tank mix other herbicides. There are instances that you can get away with it, but I highly recommend you don't. Just make it a 2-pass situation, especially if you're going with a pre-emerge herbicide. Just burn things down and then go back and pre-emerge them. I think you'll be happier in the long run and get better control. And then of course we talked about the proper mixing order already. Timing on the spray. These are some real important tips and points. I've found that if we screw these up, we can really mess up our control of annual ryegrass. And the most important thing is to make sure that annual ryegrass is actively growing in a vegetative state. And that doesn't mean it just turns green. And I've got listed on here, when it's time to mow your yard, it's time to spray annual ryegrass. Our yard has turned green a little bit here now, but it definitely hasn't grown any. And our annual ryegrass is starting to turn a little green out in the field right now, but definitely not even close to time to spray. That gets hard sometimes because everybody gets antsy in the spring and we feel we're behind. But the longer you can wait, the better control you're going to have of ryegrass. The more patience you can have, the better control you're going to have of it. Warm temps, 60s in the day and 40s at night. Making sure you get good coverage with small droplets. We use flat fans, nozzles. I know you can get AI nozzles to work if you get the pressure correct, but my biggest caution is do not use flood jet nozzles. That's where we see a lot of failures when guys go to those type of nozzles. And then 9 to 3, these times are just general times. Obviously it depends on the weather, but you want to make sure that you shut down so that you got enough time for that to translocate things before the plant shuts down at night. That's the most important key. We find that if you spray closer to dark in the evening, you'll find that your control goes way down, and it just doesn't work out very well. So we'll move on here. This is annual ryegrass, a picture of annual ryegrass that we burned down in spring of 2013. It was in corn stalks. What's interesting to notice is you can see the ryegrass is fairly tall in this picture. We had excellent growth in the fall of 2012, going into the spring of 2013. And this was 1 quart of glyphosate, 1 trip, 1 pass, and we got excellent control. Of course, you'll remember, at least in our area in the spring of 2013, we were extremely wet in April and allowed this stuff to start really growing well. So the 1st of May when we went out and burnt down, I guess the weather was our patience for that year, and it worked very, very well. This is the same field, just taking a different direction, but this is corn we planted in the annual ryegrass. It's a little fuzzy, but you can see the corn rows, and you can see the annual ryegrass is already melting down fairly well, and so we feel real good with that. The ryegrass residue in our area tends to, the longer we're in it, the more it melts down quicker. And you can see this is just a picture of corn planted into annual ryegrass. It was corn back on corn, and we got a good stand of corn, and the ryegrass residue is melting down pretty quick. We're real happy with the way we can get planted through that. Hopefully, we're switching pictures again here shortly, and we're on to the same field, just a little closer angle about side dress time. You can see it's really much the only thing we have left out there is the old corn residue. The annual ryegrass residue is pretty well all broken down. There's just not a lot left out there at this point in time. And the soil biology is really kicking up into gear and doing what we need to do, and it's just really working out very well. I'm going to kind of just show you a picture of our planter unit and how we get planted through some of these annual ryegrass residues. Some guys always ask how we're handling it. So I'll just start from the front to rear. We have Dawn residue wheels. They're hydraulic down pressure and adjustable from the cab, so we can either clear more residue or pick them up completely out of the way. We are running the precision delta force downforce on this particular planter. We do have liquid in furrow fertilizer. You can see we have no no-till culture on this particular planter, and we have Dawn closing wheels that we've selected for this planter. We've used them in the past and really got along great with them. And then we have what we call the 0x2 ground applied 2x2 in the rear. We've gone that route for two reasons. One, we looked at John Deere single disc openers on this particular planter, and it was extremely expensive on a 24-row planter. And then my concern is on a less than ideal situation, I thought we were doing maybe a little bit of side compaction, even though we were not in the trench. So I was a little bit concerned about that. So we went with the rear discharge 28, and it should put a stream on each side of the closing wheel. So we feel real comfortable, especially when we open our ground. We always have moisture with being a no-till, so we feel real comfortable with that situation. And we think it's going to work out real well again this year. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about seeding, how we seed things on our farm and how other people seed things, and the successes we've seen in the past. And we started out with the drill. It's a tried and true method on how to do seeding application. It works, good seed depth, but what we're finding is in our operation, it's just we can't cover enough ground fast enough or timely enough. In north central Indiana, we just don't have the fall time frame to get things covered timely the way we want to do it. So we've just moved on from that, and that's how we originally got started. Moving to the vertical tillage seeding, the Phillips harrow in one of the pictures here with the Valmar seeder. That's one of the ways we've tried in the past. It was kind of nice to do a little incorporating, we thought, and it was 45 feet wide, and we could pull it at about 10 to 12 miles an hour. And so we really felt that we were getting a good speed going with it, and everything worked out fine. The thing is if you have any rocks, those little tines flip them up on top, and it's kind of a bear, especially in corn-on-corn residue. It doesn't like to kind of spits out a speed bump every once in a while. But then you've got the sulfur tool with the same attachment, and they work good. A lot of guys like using those, and we'll do a little light incorporating or sizing the residue in a corn-on-corn rotation. So those things work, but we've moved away from those as well. We've kind of gone on to starting to try to work with the high boy seeders a little bit. The picture, the miller in this, one of the two pictures is a picture of Mike Shooter's miller down in Tipton, Indiana. He put that together a few years ago. And the other picture of the Heggie and the standing corn is one we demoed last year, and we got along with it really well. You can see the corn's fairly tall in that picture, and I would definitely run a little greener corn. But it's got its applications. There's no question about it. We think there's going to be a lot of potential for that, and are currently building one right now. And then back to the tried and true method, how we've always got along with seeding cover crops, especially in ryegrass, is aerial application. And hopefully you guys are all at this picture by now, and it's a picture of an airplane flying over standing corn. And this picture was taken in the fall of 2012, or excuse me, the fall of 2009. And that year in our area, we were showing 30% corn still in November when we started, and we actually finished showing corn in December that year. But the residue was green when we were trying to get ready to fly, and we knew there was absolutely no way of getting anything established unless we flew. So a few things I want to point out in this picture. You can see the color of the corn, it was green, and we had an excellent stand that year. Albeit the cover crops were shorter, we did get a good stand. They just didn't get to flush out because of such a late harvest. And then they overwintered, and things worked out very well. And the other thing is the height of the airplane. Guys need to realize that it takes a little bit of elevation to get the spread pattern that they want with the cover crops. So, you know, it works very, very well in our area, and you can get a lot of acres covered real fast. We'll move on here to just some tips on aerial application. You know, number one is pilot experience. We hear a lot of guys that have bad experiences of flying things on, and I think part of that might be pilot experience and how much they've actually done as far as aerial application of cover crops. Guys think that if they sprayed fungicide on corn that they can do cover crops, and that just doesn't always seem to be the case. I've moved my time to the middle of August to also early September. We used to run the end of August to the 1st of September, and we're moving our dates back to where we can seed earlier, and I think it's working well for us in our area. Also keep in mind you've got the wind speed. We definitely want to keep that 7 miles or below in aerial application. We find that if we get too much higher than that, we get erratic spread patterns, and it really becomes an issue to troubleshoot things moving forward. And then, of course, you know, as always things with the high boy or aerial application, rain makes these applications work. And without it, you know, we're just throwing seed out on top of the ground. But I do encourage people that to give them advice that even if it's dry in August, go get it on, because it will rain at some point. And we found this out last year, and we found out in past years, guys will cancel orders and not want things to be flown on, and then it rains, a freak rain shower blows through, and then everybody's panicking because they don't have their cover crops on. So I do encourage everybody just to do it in a timely fashion, and the rain will be there. It just always happens sooner or later. I'm going to fly through a few things here on some nutrient recycling research we've done on our farm, and just kind of show some things. So this is all done on annual ryegrass. In April 2011, we did pulled some tissue tests, and basically to do our tissue test, we have a box that's 3 feet by 3 feet square, and we can throw it down out there and cut all the above ground annual ryegrass out of it, bag it up, and send it off to have it analyzed. And so it works out pretty well, and we can translate that area into an acre size area. We figured out how much biomass, obviously, by the lab. They measured it and sent it off to us. The underground biomass was had a lot more difficult. Dan Towery helped us with that, and a couple other guys trying to figure out what was below ground in the spring and in the fall. So that's how we established those numbers. And in all of our trials we've been doing, we actually do not apply any fertilizer, nitrogen, potash, phosphorus. Everything we want to see is from a scavenging state of what was left behind the crop. So I won't repeat all of those through these tests. But anyway, in this spring, we did the test. We sent it off, had it analyzed, and we had about 51 pounds of nitrogen, 62 pounds of potassium, and 10 pounds of phosphorus left behind the corn crop that we'd scavenged, which is almost $67 of value that particular year. And we were real happy with that. And we think that's a fair average. We don't ever see a lot of phosphorus amount. That's very typical. So we were very happy with those amounts. So we're going to move on to another set of tests, and I just showed the 2011 test basically to give you a baseline. We've been doing this for a few years now, and we're trying to get baseline so we can get a feel for what happens on a general year. So we'll move on to, we call this in the Wilson farm, and then the 2012 we had a drought year, so we didn't have the best corn yields, and we had a lot of nutrients we put out there shooting for high yields. So this particular farm was 165 bushel corn in 2012, and we had side dress applied our 28, totaling 170 units of N for the year. So we pulled soil samples at 0 to 12 and 12 to 24. And then we were, and this particular farm had no cover crop for this test. So we were able to go through, and you can see the bar chart, and see how much nitrogen we had available. And we had, for some reason, I'm not able to see the side of my screen. I'm going to move. We had about 56 pounds available in the 0 to 12 and 60 at 12 to 24. So we averaged about 116 pounds of N with all the tests we did on this field, left behind a corn crop. That's a significant amount of nitrogen. It's unprotected N, and we think that's way too much. But we had to get some baselines, so we tested some things. So move on to the spring of this particular farm in April of 2013. Again, the protocol is all the same. You can see that the yield's the same, the nitrogen the same. I just typed it all out there. We won't repeat it. It still has no cover crops in the spring. But what we found is when we did the testing of 0 to 12 and 12 to 24, what we came to find out was when we added them together, we only had 30 pounds of nitrogen left in the springtime. So we went from 116 pounds of nitrogen in the fall to only 30 pounds left in April, and this was unprotected N with no cover crops. The interesting part was this test was done in April. We didn't plant for another month on this field, so I'm sure that 30 pounds that was left in a 24-inch profile was probably gone. I can't imagine it stuck around. So that's just something to give thought to as we're moving forward. We went down the road to another farm just a mile, and one of my dad's farms actually, and the test was, the protocol was the same. The field only yielded 157 bushels that year in 2012. The nitrogen protocol is the same. The sampling protocol is the same. But this particular field in late August had annual ryegrass flown on it. And so in December, when we went out and tested, we had only 12 pounds available, as you see when we added the 24-inch profile together. And 12 pounds is pretty low. We were really happy with that, to see that, where we had no cover crops, we had 116 that year, and where we had cover crops, we only had 12. So we were real happy to see that. So again, as we've been continuing through this pattern, we kept up with the protocol and did that field again in April, and we were down to 10.6 in the 24-inch profile. All the other sampling data is the same, or protocol was the same. Again, this field had annual ryegrass flown on it, so we were real happy with that. But we were real thrilled to see that we'd held all the nutrients. Now we moved on to continue on the test to make sure that we thoroughly investigated everything. We went through in December and in April again and tested the tissue of the ryegrass so that we could see whether we were holding that it was represented in the ryegrass. I guess basically we saw what was not in the soil, so we thought we better see if we could find it in the biomass. Again, this field had no nitrogen or any fertilizer applied to it. So in the fall, when we got our tissue test back, and we had everything analyzed, we had about 78 pounds of nitrogen. We'd scavenged 101 pounds of potassium and 11 pounds of phosphorus. And by the spring, we took tissue test again, and we'd had 93 pounds of nitrogen, 75 pounds of potassium, and 11 pounds of phosphorus. Again, I said before, we don't see a lot of movement on phosphorus. But the nitrogen and potassium we'd scavenged, we held pretty well through the winter. I'm sure as the plant changes, those amounts change. This is just a real good snapshot of what's going on. But what was very interesting is where we knew we wasn't in the soil, we represented it in the ryegrass and held it. And so we represented anywhere from about 98 to $102 of value that we had scavenged and not allowed to go down the watersheds. So we're going to move on real quick. This is not particular my data, but I did get lucky enough to get in a little bit on it. And I'm not promoting any company, of course, but I will say that we did get a little hand in on some of these research. So Beck's PFR studies, they've been working on cover crops behind corn, and corn behind cover crops. And so they, in these particular trials, they had 3 rates of nitrogen at 100%. Was 180 units, 75 was 135, and at 50% nitrogen is 90 pounds. So that's the nitrogen rates we're going to look at on the cover crops. And so we've got data from them for 2012 and 2013. I want to just quickly look at, and like I said, again, it's just some non-biased data that's out there. You can find this stuff on the internet. But anyway, you'll pop up 2 charts from 2012. One is the yield on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, one is the rate of return, the actual net dollar return. So I would prefer you look at the right-hand chart because that's the one I'm going to concentrate on. You have the cover crops listed on the side and then the nitrogen rates over top. And basically what you have is you have annual ryegrass by itself. You have a soybean builder mix, which is basically annual ryegrass, crimson clover, and I believe radishes. And then the corn mix is crimson clover, radish, and turnips. And you have crimson clover, radishes, and then you have the bottom line, no cover crops. And so what I think is interesting when it comes down to net dollars, because that's what we should all be focused in, not top end yield. We should worry about the bottom dollar. When you look at 50% nitrogen in 2012, then the best rate of return for the money was 50% nitrogen with annual ryegrass. The second best was the soybean builder mix, which was an annual ryegrass mix at 50% nitrogen. And then the rest of them sort out. The nice encouraging thing is we got great response over the no cover crop with almost all the cover crops we tried in this trial, or they tried in this trial. So we were real happy with that. And even the 75% gave us a real good boost. But it's just interesting to see the net returns, what happened. Now, this was a drought year, and water was more the limiting factor, but we thought we would show that. It was very interesting. So what we've come to notice was on those results that they had for that year, that overall the corn yield increased 16 bushel over the control, and which netted them an average of about $72.20 per acre over the control of no cover crop. So we were real happy with that. We really felt that was a big increase, I guess I'll say, and we're real happy the first year out for that trial. And then moved on to 2013, which was a different weather pattern, and we were interested to see how that worked out for that year, and they ran the test again. And again, the nitrogen protocol is the same cover crops on the left-hand side. And again, I only put in the rate of return for this one because it's the only thing that's important. And again, has a different weather pattern here, and the same thing, the same results came out, was that in 50% nitrogen, annual ryegrass topped the rate of return plot for the year, and we were very happy with that. The other interesting thing is the annual ryegrass mix. Also, the SB mix is an annual ryegrass mix. Was number 2 in the plot. So we were very happy. I mean, it's interesting to see that in 2 different weather patterns, but it was good information. Again, everything beat the control down at the bottom, which was very good. It's the information we're looking for, and I think the more we get into this, the more we're going to see that those type things are going to come along, and the more we get this research out there. So anyway, that kind of just explains a little bit of those charts. Move on to some soybean yields we've seen on our farms, and we've actually quit doing this test basically because we just got tired of running it, and once we saw the increase in yields, we went everything as fast as we could to cover crops. And so on our farm, following ryegrass, and we've tried cereal rye and other things, but we've just consistently stayed with ryegrass, that we consistently see 4 to 6 bushel boost where we do not have cover crops. And if you have $11 soybeans, that nets you between 44 and $66 more per acre. That definitely does more than fair share of covering your cover crop cost, and we know all the other benefits is doing to your soil health. So, and like I said, just some other benefits we've seen is increased water holding capacity, and we know that each tillage pass that we do, we can evaporate about a half inch of moisture out of the soil. The more residue we have on the soil, the more soil evaporation we'll have from the, and excuse me, let me start over on that. My mind went blank there. The more residue we have on the soil surface, the less evaporation we're going to have from the soil, and it keeps the soil cooler from the summer heats, especially when we get into those hot 100-degree days. And if we have improved aggregate stability, it improves the pore space and allows the roots to go down for additional moisture, which can be critical in those hot summer days. Just quickly talking about organic matter and how it's important. 1% organic matter equates to about 0.3 of an inch to 1 inch additional moisture capacity. And that obviously depends on your soil textures and your soil structures, but that's really important. An inch of rain in August that you've already captured for the year, just that really, really means a lot later in the summer. Organic matter is like a sponge, and it can absorb up and hold up to 90% of the soil's weight, and that's pretty impressive in its own. You can see on the picture here, this is just a picture that's been dug in a root pit of annual ryegrass, and you can see it's a little wetter picture, but you can see the annual ryegrass roots hanging down through there, and that really states a lot as far as allowing moisture to be held as you've terminated that cover crop and all those extra root channels that are going down through there. And hopefully we're staying up on the slides. It's hard for me to tell. But I'm going to talk real quick about a little soil erosion and how costly it can be. This picture I took, I don't know, a few months ago. It was after the snow melted. Well, no, I take that back. It was last fall. But anyway, this is a chiseled field of soybean stubble. And you can see all the way toward the top end of this field, you have a waterway that starts to come down, but they never finished it, whether they thought that was enough waterway or whatever coming off the neighbors, but that's all the farther they went. And you can see they stopped chiseling through this apparent wash and decided that would be good enough to control their water. But what is interesting to point out in this picture is if you look at the very bottom of the wash, just as it gets ready to dump into the riprap, that's a 6-inch tile hanging down into the wash that has eroded away. So not only have they eroded away their $12,000 to $14,000 topsoil, they have ruined their tile ditching, and that's black plastic, so it's in the newer side of things. But that's a pretty deep gully right through there, and that can be pretty costly. And the other thing that's interesting to know is you see the ditch there with the water. All that brown spot out in there around the grass, that's all their topsoil. They're eroding away and washing out in there. And that can get pretty costly. And you can see if you look down on both sides of that wash, there's some other spots that are starting. And it's just amazing how costly that can be. And in the future, that's going to be a big problem for that guy, especially if he doesn't tend to it soon. His tile ditches won't work anymore. So then the next picture pops up is a picture of one of our farms that we've aerially applied annual ryegrass on, and you can see this field does have a little bit of roll through it, but we've got a great cover and a great stand of annual ryegrass on it, and this is what we would consider minimal soil loss. There will be we can withstand a 3-inch, 4-inch rain on this, and it will run. The water will run, but it won't take anything with it. That's the nice thing about it. So we've really been able to control a lot of soil losses with the cover crop annual ryegrass. It works really well. And incidentally, the bulk of all of our cover crops on our farm We do a lot of testing on our farm, but we definitely, the number one base cover crop is either annual ryegrass by itself or it's annual ryegrass in a mix, depending on what crop we're going ahead of. So just to pass that on, we do a lot of testing, but that's our base. Just a quick note on weed suppression. I know that's a pretty hot topic with the Palmer amaranth that's coming into our area. We already know we have some confirmed in the county. And mare's tail, I got to travel a lot around the Midwest last summer, and I was just floored by the amount of mare's tail that was around, and people were just not real worried about it, seemed like. But this is a field in 2012 that we came out, we burned down and sprayed our residual down. And, of course, we planted the beans, and we had a great stand of annual ryegrass out in this field before we ever burned it down. And I know it was a drier summer, but we had some of the best beans that year because we did get some rains later in the summer. But our beans were perfectly clean. We only sprayed that field once. Now, it didn't happen on every field, of course, but it can happen. The more we use some of these cover crops, the better weed suppression we get. So just something to think about if you're having some of those particular nasty winter annuals or other noxious weeds. It works very well for us. I'm going to move again, just real quickly, talking about selecting some of these cover crops and timing. This is a test we ran a couple years ago, and it just kind of to prove some things to us. On the left-hand side, you can see some radishes that we planted. It was late in the fall, and I say late in the fall. It's probably around the end of September, beginning of October in our area here. We just don't get the growth in the fall that we need. But we planted them and we dug them up, and they were not bad size, but they were not the trophy size radishes you see. And they do some good, but still, just shows you what we've got to understand. Timing is very critical on getting these things seeded. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see some tubes we grew. We filled them full of dirt and just basically left them out all winter. Planted some annual ryegrass, some cereal rye, and wheat. And basically, this was the easiest way, since I don't have a soil core machine yet, this was the easiest way for me to show you how deep things got very easily for the camera. And so basically, you've got the annual ryegrass roots, and you can see they go almost all the way to the bottom of the tube. Just really pleased with the way they went down, and very, very deep rooting. The cereal rye that particular year, you can see they go down a ways, and then the soil you don't see any white roots on farther down. And the wheat, you hardly see any white roots down there very deep at all. So it just kind of was a visual for us to show why we've chosen annual ryegrass on our farm. And, just kind of, it's sometimes easier to see than a root pit. That was one of the tests we ran a couple years ago. Let those overwinter, all winter outside, and then split them in the spring to see what we had. I can't ever say this enough, that it's always important for everybody to do their own test on their farms. To dig your own root pits, see what's going on with annual ryegrass underground. The above ground is neat at 60 miles an hour, but what's really important to see is what's going on underground. And this is just one of our aerial pictures, again from the helicopter of a field across the road from where we live. And it's everything's done in 60-foot strips, full length of the field. And we've got about, I think we've got 6 or 8 things replicated 3 times out here. Some mixes and some solo cover crops as well that we just, we're going to take the yield so we get some more yield data on a different weather year. Hopefully maybe do some nitrogen trials on that if we get the opportunity to do that. But always trying to keep in touch with what's going on with the economics on this, because that's the number one important. Just kind of a quick review on things about annual ryegrass. In my mind, it pays. It controls erosion. It increases water holding capacity. It increases our yields, weed suppression, increasing our organic matter, and obviously improving our soil health. And I know that we were talking about controlling annual ryegrass, but we always got to mention the important things up front, the benefits of annual ryegrass. And then this. Hopefully the slides are going to update here quickly because it looks like it's not bumping through. But basically just want to thank the No-Till Farmer for hosting this webinar today. We want to also thank KB Seeds today for sponsoring the webinar, and really appreciate their efforts to try to get the information out to everybody. And that's pretty much all I have on annual ryegrass today. At the end, it's got my email address if anybody has any questions after this is all over with. I do answer emails. It does take me a few days usually, but I do answer them after a while. So,
All
Daryl, I
right.
think that's about all I have. Um,
Hey, real good, Cam. Thank you very much for doing that. If you don't mind, see if you can scroll back to near the beginning of your presentation, particularly where you talked about the different ingredients that go in the tank. If you want to go to that slide.
okay.
While you're doing that, I'll throw another question, but I want to refer back to that slide here at some point. But I've got a couple questions here that have come in as you're doing it. Here's the first one. Um, this person says that he's been told in the past that you need to kill annual ryegrass as early as you can. How does that kind of fit within your philosophy? Do you see that as being that you do need to kill it as early as possible?
Okay, so I'm going to try to do this as delicately as I can without stepping on anybody's toes, but there's a lot of misinformation that's been spread over the years about annual ryegrass. Some by bad experience, but also by just flat out some people are scared of it. And um, I don't worry about killing it as early as possible. I mean, does not bother me. It just doesn't really bother me. I don't worry about a height to kill it at. I worry about the conditions of the ryegrass. Is it warm? Is it going to continue to be warm after I spray it? Because you definitely don't want to spray it and get a cold snap right after. You don't want to spray it one day when it's 60 and the next day is 30 degrees. That's probably not going to, be very well. It's not going to kill very well. And I don't care if the ryegrass is 4 inches tall. I don't care if it's 6 inches tall or a foot tall. The key is that the ryegrass is actively growing and in a vegetative state. And as long as it's warm and it's actively growing and you get good coverage, you should have excellent results in controlling it.
Okay. I wanted to take you back to this slide because one of the folks online asked if you could review the mixing order again that you use, and you've got the ingredients up here, but if you want to go through that mixing order again.
Okay. Yeah, I will do that. And like I said, I apologize. My timing on moving the slides around it moves real fast for me. Obviously, I apologize for it moving slower, you guys. Um, the ingredients are listed on this page is what we use. But in the mixing order, I put the AMS in first as we're filling the tank up with water. I want that AMS to agitate and condition the water so we don't tie up anything of the other products we're using of the Roundup or anything else. We put the citric acid in. Obviously, that's to lower our pH of the water. And then put the Roundup in 2,4-D in at the very end when the tank's almost full and we've agitated it for a little bit, getting that AMS to condition the water. So we do not put in all these ingredients all at the same time.
Okay. Have you had some experience probably with some escapes? And how have you ended up controlling those? To what degree have you experienced that?
Okay, so in the past, yes, we have experienced escapes. I can't sit here and tell you all the good without the bad. And typically, what has happened when a mistake has been made, I can point to myself when we analyze the situation. I either went too early, or the weather turned off cold, or I jumped the gun. I should have gone fishing and get antsy. Everybody gets nervous this time of year about getting the work done. So typically, if we've had an escape, it's been my fault. What we've done is, again, we put the 1 quart of Roundup to burn down. The nice thing is then if you do pre-emerge your crop, your corn crop or whatever, then if you do miss something, let's say you miss a spurt or you get a 99% control, you could throw an extra pint or quart of Roundup in your pre-emerge that time, and the rest of it will be gone, no problem. I mean, it won't be a problem. If we've had escapes, we could do that in the past. We don't, and on our operation, we don't try to take any of it out in crop because we are non-GMO corn. So we really just, after pre-emerge, we have no opportunity to kill Roundup.
Okay. I got a couple questions I'm going to kind of combine here, but have you ever had any issues, perhaps with some seed dormancy and maybe the emergence of ryegrass coming up within a crop, or perhaps, like the following year, almost kind of like a volunteer situation?
Yeah, we've had a situation in the past where we called it latent seed, which was basically it just didn't germinate. I mean, it's kind of like the old hairy vetch thing that some of that seed's got hard seed in it. Well, we're not really sure that it's hard seed, but on annual ryegrass, the germ is actually better with 2-year-old seed than it is with 1-year-old seed. So fresh seed, the germ is not as good as it is with older seed. So that's what we found. And yes, we have had a situation where we actually had annual ryegrass in corn, flown on in corn. Planted beans next year. We had killed annual ryegrassers 100%. It looked really good. Combined the beans, and the next spring that fall we had planted winter peas out in it, actually trying some new projects. And the next spring, after that, when we getting ready to kill the peas, we actually had spurts of annual ryegrass growing out there. So it wasn't a solid mat. It was just a few here and there. When we killed the peas, we went right in and killed the annual ryegrass. There was no problem. It had not gone to seed or anything, so there was no problems. But we have experienced that in the past, and usually, at least anything we've experienced with managing it properly up front, any of those problems that have reared their head, we've been able to manage them very easily.
Okay. And I should say, Cam, if there's any questions here that you're not comfortable answering, don't feel you need to try. One question here that came up was and I don't know again if you've had any experience with this, but have you seen any like differences in varietal sensitivity and how a herbicide application might influence control based on the variety of ryegrass that you had?
So that's a loaded question right there. We have tried some we have tried some different varieties of ryegrass from different companies, and so most of the time we have had not seen any issues with annual ryegrass and burning it down in the varieties we tried. Now, having said that, I will caution everybody, since the question got brought up, I want one variety per bag. I do not want a mix. I do not want 3 or 4 different varieties in the same bag. And because that does pose a huge problem at termination time in the spring, because 1 or 2 of those varieties may have come out of dormancy, and you think it's ready to go, and you're flat out spraying, and the other 2 may not be out actively growing, and so you may not get them all on first pass. And that becomes a big problem. But as far as differences from different companies, as long as there's, one ryegrass per bag, we have not had a problem.
Okay. How have you worked with any alternatives to using Roundup in a burn down, or I've known of folks who have used any other alternatives?
Yeah, both of those. To the answer is yes. We know of other people who have tried it, and we've tried some things in the past. The thing we've found out is the Roundup, just if it's done properly, it works so well, and it's tried and true. And we hate to really screw it up when we're talking to other folks. The one thing that we have tried in the past. We've played around with Gramoxone and had some success. I can't say that we've done enough trials or anything to be successful at it, and we have used Select on it as well. Again, those chemicals, the temperature has to be right, the conditions have to be right, and we're just not comfortable in recommending that. We've tried them, but I stick with what works for our operation.
Okay. You've done a good job explaining the conditions that you're looking for to go out and spray and control it. In general terms, how far ahead of planting would you say that you've typically killed annual ryegrass? Have you been out there days before planting, or weeks, or what's kind of the range that you've kind of hit as far as the timing ahead of planting that you've killed annual ryegrass?
Right. Okay. So if we had a normal spring, and I don't know what that is anymore, but if we have a normal spring and we get what we want, we would prefer to, 10 days to 2 weeks, we'd like to go out and kill the annual ryegrass ahead of corn planting. and have everything in good shape and go out and plant our corn. Unfortunately, we have not had the weather that's made that possible off and on the last few years. Last year in 13 we didn't get to spray anything until May, and we also didn't get to plant anything until May. So we had cover crops that were growing at a high rate of speed in May, and so we had the planter, the sprayer, and a lot of things going all at once. We did try to keep the sprayer ahead of the planters. I know in a couple instances the sprayer was spraying in ryegrass, and 2 days later the bean planter was in there planting. We tried to keep it ahead of the corn planter farther than that, but we were doing everything we could last year to get everything done in a timely fashion. So it does pose a few issues from time to time, but the weather is the biggest factor. I'd like to have it a little bit farther ahead. That 10 days, 2 weeks would be ideal if the weather worked out and the conditions were good for the ryegrass. That would be my choice.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've been kind of trying to read through the questions coming here while I'm trying to listen to your answers as well. So if you've answered this, I apologize. But have you ever planted into a live ryegrass, into living ryegrass?
Yes, and by the way, I'm glad you're reading the question because I couldn't answer and read at the same time either, so I'd be in trouble. But yeah, we have planted into, I guess I wouldn't tell RMA this, but yeah, we've planted into live cover crops, live annual ryegrass. Again, it was just a time that we were trying different things. We have not tried thousands of acres that way, but we wanted to see if we could do it if we needed to. It did work just fine. We didn't have any issues really to speak of. The thing that we have to remember is that if we have a really great stand of annual ryegrass, which is what we want to have, that becomes almost like a mat of yard roots almost. And you can imagine planting corn or soybeans even through your yard. There's just not a lot of soil that's left undisturbed. I mean, you really got to make sure you are prepared to close it and other things. So that's why we like for it to be dead ahead of planting. But we have tried it, and it did work. It was successful. But I don't know that I want to go plant thousands of acres that way.
Well, I was going to ask you again too about your planter setup. I know you showed that before. What kind of challenges have you run into planting into annual ryegrass? I mean, considering that it could have been desiccated weeks ahead of time and has started to break down very well, or whether you've actually desiccated it pretty close to planting time. Have you seen any kind of issues when you started working with annual ryegrass early on that you had to make some adjustments to your planter?
Oh, absolutely. When we first started out 7 or 8 years ago, I think I probably could make every mistake there ever was made the first year. We went to it thinking we needed to plant it earlier, and it was too wet really, and we had trouble closing the slot, and we had trouble, just didn't manage it very well, I'll say that. And so from that point forward, we just made a point that if when the conditions were proper on planting our cover crops, we would make sure that we were at those fields at the proper time. We really scouted and really made sure that the fields were drier and made sure that the fields that had cover crops at that time, we did them when it was the proper time, when it was dry. The other thing we noticed was, well, now since everything is pretty well covered with cover crops, we don't have that challenge near as much, and we find that for the most part we're a day or two behind the neighbors that are doing the mud and fluff, but we get along pretty well.
Okay. Have you had any experience or seen anybody who's tried to, like, say, crimp annual ryegrass, use a crimper to control it rather than having to come in with herbicide? I don't know if that's even a possibility, or if you've ever had an experience or know of anybody who's tried that.
No, I've never tried it. I've never heard of anybody trying it. But if somebody does try it, give me a call. I want to come watch because I think that will be one exciting spring.
Okay. All
I
right.
think it could be. I think it could be a big mess. But I'm always interested for people to try things. So.
Mm-hmm. Why? Here's a question just about your choice. Why do you choose annual ryegrass over something like winter wheat or cereal rye? And I know you had a really nice photo earlier of that showed the rooting between the three. But what kind of lead us through your decision making process here for why you use annual ryegrass?
Okay, so for we'll take care of the winter wheat reason for right out of the gate. The rooting is just, in my opinion, in our area, what we've seen is pretty subpar compared to the other two. Also, wheat has an opportunity to bring in some diseases and things we really don't want anyway. So um, we just stricken it right out of the gate. We don't even mess with it. Even if we could get cheap seed, we don't even mess with it because of those reasons, and the rooting is just subpar. The reason when we first got started in the cover crops, we split a 100-acre field with annual ryegrass and cereal rye, and we wanted to see what it looked like. And so we did root digs and different things. And so we've kind of settled on annual ryegrass. And then the reasons are we like the root structure we see from the annual ryegrass on our farms. We really feel it gives a little more depth. We feel that the rooting structure just is better for us. We also like the fact that in the springtime, annual ryegrass is a little slower to come out compared to cereal rye. So in my plot right now, annual ryegrass is starting to green up, but it's pretty short still and not doing a whole lot. Cereal rye was green as soon as the snow came off. And I would say if we get some temperature here in the next few days, it's going to explode. And for instance, last year, I told you, we didn't get to plant or spray anything until May, and we were planting and headed out cereal rye. We always plant like 100 acres of that just to see if we're missing anything. And it really didn't bother anything. But if you're trying to plant corn into that, I really would be nervous having guys planting into headed out cereal rye, corn anyway, that is, because it can lead to some issues with the carbon nitrogen ratio, tie up way too much nutrients for that corn crop. Soybeans is a lot different issue. But like I said, for our operation, it gives us a lot of time, and we don't have to worry about planting corn ahead of it or into it. We just feel it's a really good fit for our operation.
Okay. Can you explain why you're not using 28% in the termination mix? I know that was one of the things you said not to do.
Right. So the problem with the 28 is very simple. If something goes wrong and the 28 doesn't kill it, then what happens is the 28 burns the leaf tissue and does not allow the glyphosate to be absorbed as well. And when that happens, you don't get to fully translocate it, and it just becomes a big problem. Then a lot of times what will happen is you just end up ticking off the annual ryegrass, and then you get to do it again, get to spray it again.
Okay, good. Well, we hit the time limit here, and we still have a few questions that are left. We're going to go ahead and pass those along to you, Cameron, to answer here later. But boy, thank you for the a very good presentation. You left a lot of good time here for some great questions, so appreciate you doing that. Before we conclude, I just want to give you a heads up that when you log off today, you're going to receive a questionnaire to complete. It's a very simple, easy one, small number of questions. And that's helpful. Your answers really help us determine the value of today's webinar and plan for future ones. We are going to be making this available, the replay of it available via email to you. In the event you'd like to go back and review the entire presentation or parts of it, it's also going to be up on our No-Till Farmer website shortly. You'll also find archives of other webinars that we've done here recently. Finally, again, like you said, any questions we didn't get to this morning, we're going to share those back with Cameron to answer, and we'll try and get those posted as soon as they are available. So I do want to thank you again, Cameron, for leading today's presentation. Thanks for doing that. I also want to thank Wayne Kaiser and Nick Bowers with KB Seed Solutions for sponsoring today's webinar. And I want to thank our producer today, Cole Vandermouse, for getting us through all the technology here. So a real big thanks again to all of you for joining us, and we hope that you're going to be able to get after your field work shortly and get that crop in. So have a good rest of the week and a good spring. Thanks again.